Welcome to Short and to the Point, a podcast from the Comeback in Awful Announcing. Here's your host, Jessica Kleinschmidt.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Short and to the Point here on Awful Announcing and the Comeback. Jessica Kleinschmidt here. We are toward the end of baseball season, which means the beginning of the NFL season. And your girl's a little rusty. She is a little rusty transitioning from sport to sport. And you'll hear that here in my intro in a little bit. One of my best friends in the whole wide world, Peter Bukowski, stopped by Locked On Packers, and he also writes on The Leap. And it's such an interesting time, not just for football, but compared to last season with the crazy storylines, mainly being Aaron Rodgers, and being able to not only implement that in today's discussion, but the lack of storyline kind of created another discussion, of course, with Brandon Aiyuk. Will he be with the 49ers for the long haul or will he not? But definitely opened up a discussion on what these guys are dealing with as far as I want you to want me, but I want you to prove it as far as some of these contractual obligations go. So we chatted about that. And of course, the upcoming Packer season, all the Jordan love, and how Bullard looks to break out of camp and, practices heading into the season. It'll be interesting to see how he does as a young, versatile player. So we talk about that and so much more. And who doesn't love an Aaron Rodgers conspiracy talk? I certainly do. So here's my chat with Peter Bukowski. And remember, your girl is still rusty. Well, we have a repeat offender. Peter Bukowski joins us for Locked On Panthers. And you can also follow his Substack, read all of his stuff wherever you can find him. And Peter, we have a lot to go over. First and foremost, welcome back to the show. I appreciate you being here.
I appreciate it too. I don't Locked On Packers, not Locked On Panthers, but that's okay.
Did I say Locked On Panthers? I can redo Carolina. That. Gosh, damn it. We're starting early. We're killing it this morning. I will redo that. I'm so sorry. But speaking of Locked On Packers, which is very much your show, there's a lot to go over with them. Let's get started, though. They just had a recent practice against the Ravens and kind of coming a long way since their previous practice against the Broncos. What are the takeaways there? And could you see some improvements with this team right now?
Yeah, I mean, not to go full Allen Iverson, but we're talking about practice, right? Not a game. So we have to remember that part of it too. But it was frustrating for Matt LaFleur to go into Denver last week and for the Packers to not take it as seriously, certainly as Denver. Now, I think reasonable people can disagree about how serious Denver took it because they were like, this is our Super Bowl. That's how they handled it. Like they're in the preseason games Sean Payton's calling his A plays and like specials, and they got their starters out there, and the Packers have their third stringers, but they just didn't bring the intensity the way that a team that wants to compete for a Super Bowl, the way that you would expect them to do that. So then you bring in a Baltimore Ravens team that they're probably not going to play their starters on Saturday. The Packers are probably not going to play theirs, but Matt LaFleur before the joint practice said, we'll see. And I think that was a clear message to his team. That was, hey, show up or you are going to be playing on Saturday in a preseason game. And they did. And that's what you want to see. This last year was a team, Jess, that they beat the Lions and the Chiefs in back-to-back weeks and then lost to Tommy DeVito in New York on Monday night. You have to learn how to win as a team. Kenny Clark said that on a podcast this week, that they needed to learn how to win as a team. And they needed to learn how to stay focused. Like you're this young team, you're battling, you think you're doing great. You get these two huge wins to save your season. And you think you're going to go to New York and dog walk Tommy Cutlets. And that's not the NFL. That's not how this works. So it was good to see them bring that intensity when they needed it. They have to find that for 17 games this year.
And when it comes to just the Packers fandom, I feel like every single breath is determinant upon how this Packers team is doing. So do they also realize this is just practice, or do they kind of go a little crazy?
Some do, some don't. Right. And what's funny is I was critical of the team after the Broncos game, and I caught a lot of heat for that. People were like, it's just preseason. But I also know that if I were like, hey, it doesn't matter, it's just preseason, people would go, oh, you're afraid to criticize the team. And like, this is, BS and all that stuff. So from a content creation standpoint, there is a little bit of no winning, right? Like that I feel like just trying to be honest and as objective as I can be about it is the best way to handle it. But there are always going to be people annoyed that you're not one direction or the other. And you know this, some people just want to be mad. Some people just like, it doesn't matter what you do. And this is a sports thing. Like fans, I'm sure fans, maybe you are a fan like this in some way, shape or form, where if you're not annoyed about something, you're kind of not happy, right? Like if you're not going, this kicker, this guy sucks. Like you're not happy. And some people are just like that as fans. That's just where they live. And that's okay too. I'm not here to tell anyone how to be a fan. I can just only do what I do. And I do think it matters. I think the practices matter. It determines positioning. It determines who's going to start and who's not. And we see this every year. Guys hit in the preseason games that maybe were not big in practice. They were not training camp stars, but they go off in the preseason. And I'll never forget seeing Victor Cruz for the first time in a playoff game for the New York Giants. He wasn't even wearing, I think he was wearing 1 or 0 or something in a preseason game. He looked incredible. And I was like, who is this guy? And then he, comes in and has a borderline Hall of Fame career. These games and these practices absolutely matter. And one last thing, Jess, I know I'm rambling, but I really like these joint practices because we would never have gotten Jordan Love against the #1 Ravens defense or Lamar Jackson against the #1 Packers defense without a joint practice. That was never going to happen. And these are two teams that believe they can be Super Bowl teams. That's really good for both teams to have an opportunity to play with some intensity, with some stakes on the line. There's pride, all that stuff in a situation like this. So I really like the joint practices. I think this is going to be something that we see a lot more moving forward.
Are you on your own island when it comes to appreciating the joint practices? Because I think about injury when it comes to like these types of things. You mentioned the intensity and it is practice. So what percentage are these guys actually going up against each other, knowing that it's not just the fact that it's a preseason game, but we know how physical this sport is. Yeah. What about other members of the media? Are they on the same island as you, or are you kind of alone in that?
I think it will depend on the team, because I think some teams take them more seriously than other teams. And I also think that there are players and positions where they matter more. Like we can't even have in the NFL anymore. Teams won't even do DB receiver one-on-ones anymore. Like the Packers just stopped doing them because they lead to so many fights. Like it's just like those are the guys where it's going to be physical. They just let them go play. And at the end, just the attitude that corners and DBs have at the end, they're going to talk. It's going to get chippy. And so they don't even do it anymore. So for them, it's a different thing. But like we always see the offensive and defensive linemen do one-on-ones. And I do take away something from that. I want to see, if I'm looking at the Packers, they're trying to figure out some things with their offensive line. I want to see Sean Ryan going up against Justin Madubuike and some of these guys in Baltimore. I want to see Kenny Clark going up against Tyler Linderbaum. I want to see those matchups that we don't get to see in practice every day. Like if you're the kind of fan who follows the Twitter streams with bated breath and get all the updates on the one-on-ones, you're going, hell yeah, give me more of this, more opportunities to see it. And actually Baltimore last year streamed one of their joint practices. And I think that's where we're headed. I think we're going to see more of this, where teams are going to treat these almost like we're going to reduce the preseason games. Maybe we only have 2 preseason games. And then you have a joint practice that you allow your TV partners to stream where you can simulate the action. You have more control over it and you still get to prepare your team. I think closer to the start of the season too. This is the perfect time for this to happen right before the season. You get a Super Bowl caliber tune-up for your team without having to risk injury the same way you would if, you're playing 60 minutes. It's not like that.
And maybe just a graphic or a watermark saying this is just a practice, everybody relax. And it's really cool. You talk about these battles, of course, and the guy I wanted to pick your brain about is Bullard. You reported on him in these recent practices. He's kind of, I don't know if he's towing the line anymore about like first and second, as far as the possibility of him being on that starting.
He has jumped over the line, Jess.
So he's jumped over it.
He is the starter right now.
Why is he that dude? What makes him that dude?
It's so funny. Matt LaFleur a couple of weeks was asked about him and, is he the starter? Is he just like penciled in as the starter? And he was like, oh, they'll still be rotating. Jess, when I tell you every single practice, when they have rolled out the ones with the team, he has been the starting safety. So Matt LaFleur can say there's a rotation.
He's just covering himself, and I appreciate it.
Ain't no rotation, right? This is
There's
Javon
no
Bullard's
rotation.
job. The question I think now is, where is he going to play most snaps? Because we saw something really interesting against Denver. And this is something that I have been pushing on Locked On Packers, even a bit to the chagrin of one of the players involved. I think the best 11 for this Packers team includes both of their rookie safeties. Javon Bullard, who played the nickel corner. He was a slot player at Georgia when he was the MVP of their college football playoff run, knocked Marvin Harrison Jr. out of that game, and they won the national title. And then they moved him to safety. Kirby Smart moved him to safety. He was incredible in the nickel, and they said, we need you in this other spot. Can you do it? He said, yes. And so we saw him against Denver last week. In just like normal defensive packages, they were playing with three safeties, and Javon Bullard was in the slot. I think that's their best group, and I think they could be a team that just says, Xavier McKinney, who's a new free agent acquisition from the New York Giants, he can play in the slot. Get out there. Javon Bullard, he can play in the slot. Get out there so that they can be so multiple with the way that they attack. You never know who's going to be anywhere. And it's so hard now, Jess, to play defense because they're like, how many teams have a coach that we consider like an offensive guru? Like most of the league does. And it seems like it's expanding. Like the Kyle Shanahan tree, the Shanahan-McVay tree might be the most successful coaching tree since like the Mike Holmgren, Bill Walsh tree. And even they had way more misses than like all these coaches are good. Sean McVay, Mike McDaniel, Matt LaFleur, Kevin Stefanski, of course, Kyle Shanahan. Like I just named a quarter of the league's coaches. And they're all good. And Zach Taylor in Cincinnati, they went to a Super Bowl. So, I mean, it's pretty remarkable. You have to be so diverse in the way that you attack those teams. We saw Baltimore last year beat the brakes off the 49ers because they confused them. And you have to be able to confuse offenses, and that means moving pieces around. I think Javon Bullard and Xavier McKinney are the perfect modern safeties for that kind of defense.
Well, and it's interesting you're talking, because I know versatility is something for Bullard that is very prominent with him. But versatility is always interesting because it could either help or hurt somebody. So
you don't want to be a jack of all trades and a master of none.
Exactly. So it's kind of interesting with that. When I hear versatility, you get excited. You want to have a utility person. But when it comes to executing it, do you want somebody to be good at multiple things or great at one?
Yeah, and I think the hope for the Packers is that he can be great at multiple things. I mean, that's the perfect thing.
And is that a fair assessment?
Well, it's what he can do. Yes, I think he's better in the slot. I think he's better closer to the line of scrimmage. But can he be a good deep half, deep middle safety? Yeah, I think he can. The thing is like optimal is you can't let great be the enemy of the good. So if he's the best at nickel, and you only play him in nickel, are you limiting what your defense can do? Because sometimes that can happen. And I think it's also the case that if he's your best safety, he's got to be back there, even if his best position is nickel. So find a way to thread that needle of doing both. And luckily, they drafted a safety in Evan Williams, who a lot of people thought, based on the consensus, that was an overdraft. And Jim Nagy, the Senior Bowl director, told me on Locked On Packers, he said, there were other teams that were going to take Evan Williams in the fourth if the Packers didn't. He was a guy in that range that was going to get picked in that range. Teams loved him. And he has just shown up right away. You mentioned the joint practices. I think he's got 5 interceptions in camp. He's just been a playmaker. And you see it. You see it out there. He's a really sure tackler. He's just an instinctive football player. His feel. I mean, I think spatial awareness is the most important trait you can have as a back 7 player, especially if you're a spine defender, if you're a linebacker, if you're a safety. You have to have an understanding of space. And he understands route concepts. He understands, okay, if this receiver is coming in, there's a guy going out, and I need to account for that guy, because that's just how concepts work. And he thinks the game at a really high level, which has allowed him to come in right away and contribute.
Amazing. I wanted to shift gears to Jordan Love, of course. And you mentioned the McVay and Shanahan offense, but with Matt LaFleur kind of at the helm of all of this, is he able to go away from this McVay Shanahan offense that he kind of altered with Aaron Rodgers there. So is he allowed to be more Matt LaFleur with Jordan Love in the pocket as a quarterback?
I think what happened last year in a lot of ways is they got the Aaron Rodgers out of the offense, and it was the best thing for the offense because and that's not shade at Aaron Rodgers necessarily. It's just that Rodgers was comfortable with certain things. And so you're going to let when someone has, and this was one of the most fun things about covering that 2019 team. Matt LaFleur said, when someone has a 400 level knowledge of offense, of one thing, a graduate level offense. I mean, Rodgers could teach the class. He is in New York right now. He's that his offense. You don't want to have him go back to a 101 level of an offense just because the other guys are 101. What you want is to say, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to take some of those concepts that you already know by heart, and we're going to add them in so that the guys who are at like all these rookies and young players who are going to be 101 level of everything, we might as well take some of the stuff that at a 401 level and put it into our offense. And then it worked, right? Yeah. It worked. You have Devontae Adams and Aaron Rodgers, and it works. And he goes back-to-back MVP. But Jordan Love was not a 401 level player in those concepts. And then also, either were your players that were already there. They were, maybe 200 level. So it doesn't work in the same way. So he was able to, he being Matt LaFleur, say, okay, then let's major in the stuff that I know at a 400 level, that I know works. And they were able to do that. Jordan Love can do some of the things from the gun that Aaron Rodgers does. Commanding at the line of scrimmage and making adjustments. There's this great example. Anyone you ask about Jordan Love on this team, on the coaching staff that covers the team, they will tell you one play in Dallas gave you everything. And it was in the red zone. I think they're already up 21-0, 14-0, something like that. And it's a zero blitz, all out pressure from Dallas. Jordan Love changes the protection. And Dontavian Wicks was telling the story recently. He was like, I don't even know what he did. He did something that the offensive line knew what to do and the backs knew what to do. They blocked it up, and he throws this beautiful touchdown with, they know he couldn't block everybody. They didn't have enough blockers to block everybody. And he knew that. And so he had to kind of almost half pump fake. And then he throws an absolute dime to Dontavian Wicks for a touchdown. And everyone was just like, that's it. That's the guy. Understanding, reading the defense pre-snap, making the adjustment at the line of scrimmage, and then putting a perfect throw where only your guy can get it against one of their best corners, Stephon Gilmore, who's still one of, the 15 or 20 best corners in the league. That was the moment where everyone was just sort of like, that's kind of like the old guy. Like, that's kind of like Aaron Rodgers. That's what he was able to do. So there are still pieces of that in this offense. But they're able to lean more into the Shanahan-ness and the Matt LaFleur-ness. Like I think we need to give Matt LaFleur his credit for what he's doing. But they were able to meld the offense in a way that made sense for Jordan Love, the same way they were for Aaron Rodgers. And I think Matt LaFleur deserves a ton of credit for that.
Yeah, it seems like it's coming up to where he needs to kind of showcase what he's able to do, but still stay true to what people are used to. And, more on Aaron Rodgers there, I thought it was an interesting conversation I came across recently when it comes to bringing Jordan Love into the Packers onto the team necessarily. And heading into this, Aaron Rodgers was similar to Jordan Love in the fact that they wanted to move on from Aaron Rodgers to Jordan Love. Previously, they wanted to move on from Favre to Rodgers. So there was a comp there, and that's just kind of off the field stuff. But the thing I thought that was super interesting was the relationship between Jordan Love and Aaron Rodgers comparatively to the lack of relationship with Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers. So is that a personality thing? And we know Aaron Rodgers as more of a personality, and then he also happens to be an NFL quarterback with the way that he's been, in the media lately.
Yeah,
so
right.
Talk to me a little bit more about the differences between those two relationships.
Yeah. What I find so fascinating, and it only struck me as you were explaining it. Brett Favre, if I would have asked you myself, if you would have asked me in 1995 or 1996 when Brett Favre was at his
I would have loved to know you back then.
I mean, look, I was, 9 years old. I was a lot of fun at 9 years old.
Yeah.
I was wearing cowboy boots and jeans and brush poppers. I thought,
and I was still the same size that I am today. Yeah.
And I probably was too.
Yeah.
And then it changed. No, he was this fun-loving guy and everyone's favorite teammate and just like one of the boys. And it would have shocked me to find out that he was cold to a backup quarterback. Doug Peterson for years was his best friend. Now, Doug Peterson, not half as good as Brett Favre. The difference is when Rodgers came in, Favre was mulling retirement, and Favre took it really, really personally in a way that I did not expect. And also, Aaron Rodgers, if you read The Gunslinger, which is a great book by Jeff Pearlman, Rodgers was a dick, like flat out was a dick to Brett Favre, saying things like calling him grandpa and old man and just like constantly poking the bear, as it were. And then in practice, going out and like throwing no-look passes, and he looks the part too. He's this swaggering guy. And that's just the opposite of how Brett Favre was. So that was oil and water from the start. Now, post-career, they have mended that fence and they're friends and they actually speak regularly, apparently, which is interesting. But Jordan Love is not that guy. But Aaron Rodgers is prickly. We know that he's a prickly guy. And so he was pissed about the draft pick. But if you hear him tell it, he will say it was never about Jordan Love. It was just about what he represented. That the team was ready to get rid of me. I was mad at the team. It wasn't Jordan Love's fault. And so it is a remarkable piece of compartmentalization, if you want to go to therapy for a second, and have
Which I will in about a half hour. Yeah.
Yeah, which is good. It's good. Everyone can benefit from something like that. We have this incredible compartmentalization between the way I feel about how you arrived here and how I feel about you, the person. That seems impossible to me that he was able to do that. And yet, if you ask Jordan Love, he will tell you Rodgers was his boy, still is his boy, and that they have a great relationship off the field. And there is a cynical side of some people will tell you, oh, well, Rodgers cozy up to Love because he knew Love wasn't as good as him and it didn't matter. And the reason that Favre hated Rodgers was better than Favre at that point in their careers. I don't know if I buy that, frankly. And also, Jordan Love is really good. I don't know, like people watched last year, the second half especially, like he was awesome.
Yeah.
And if you listen to people around that organization, and I've talked to players about it, like you could see it in practice. Jordan Love was and is really, really talented. It is kind of remarkable though that their relationship remained intact, given how pissed off Aaron Rodgers was that this all went down the way that it did.
Yeah. And on that factor, like I mentioned, what's it been like when you're covering any athlete, and especially with Aaron Rodgers, where it's not really what he does, it's what he says now. And so what's that been like, the coverage? Because when you're in the media, and especially in NFL, we're obsessed with the X's and O's, and then you are introduced the pop culture element to it. Yeah. But for him, he's always been obsessed with conspiracy theories. I think that's important to mention because he was obsessed with the JFK assassination, just like the rest of the world was. But now that since COVID hit, he kind of like enhanced this a little bit. Yeah. What's it been like introducing that factor into the Aaron Rodgers quarterback?
For me, it never, I can't be completely objective about it because I don't know for sure how, like, there's implicit biases in everything, right? Like we don't always know how the biases affect our ability to reason with something in a meaningful way. But I will say, I always liked Aaron Rodgers, the guy, fine in 2014 through 2020, whatever. Like the guy before that, like he was always easy to root for to me. And I appreciated the transparency. He was always he was hard to read in a way, like this inscrutable superstar. I'll never forget the anecdote from Mina Kimes profiling him on ESPN, the magazine. She sits down at his place, puts her phone down. He puts his phone down as if to say, I'm going to be recording this too, just so nothing gets taken out of context. Wow. That was how he was. And that changed with COVID. You mentioned it. And I think what really changed about covering him was it became impossible to criticize him without it being drawn back to his COVID stance. It became impossible to say that was just as something simple as that was a bad throw, or that was a bad decision, or that was bad body language, and not have someone say, you just don't like him because he wouldn't get the jab. it became so political. And by the way, he leaned into that and has said that.
And never denied it either.
But he's also said on the record, the only thing anyone can say about me is this, they don't like this. And that's why people criticize me. It's the only reason people criticize me, which is just objectively not true. Like, the only people still talking about the COVID vaccine and his stance on the COVID vaccine is Aaron Rodgers. No one cares in Packers media, in Packers fandom, except the people who see it as a chance to put him on the cross and martyr him over it. I don't care, Jess. I have like, when it happened, it was one thing. And what I cared about was that he lied about it.
Yeah.
And you know, I thought Ian O'Connor, who wrote this great book on Aaron Rodgers, in his conversation with Rodgers, told him, and he was on Locked On Packers, shameless plug if you want to go listen to it. You know, if I had been in that room, this is Ian speaking, I don't think if you'd have told the truth, I don't think I would have written a column killing you for it. But everyone killed him for it when we found out he had COVID and lied about getting the vaccine. Now he has a reason that he claims for being less than forthcoming, let's say, about it. Your mileage can vary on that. Like, I don't really need to delve into it, but it did change the way that he was covered, because I think he changed. He started to make this adversarial relationship with the media, which was leaned into on Pat McAfee's show, because they're the pirate ship. They're the interlopers too. And so they like to take shots. Everyone else is doing you a disservice by not covering the sport the way we do, which, by the way, everyone does. Everyone says that, because now with the crowded media landscape, like I do it on Locked On Packers, I was like, they're not telling you, like, big media is not giving you all the information that you need, not in a conspiratorial way, just in sort of like, I have to justify my existence. I have to explain to our audience why you should listen to me and not the people on ESPN.
And that's more of like a regional beat reporting versus national. Yeah.
And Pat McAfee and their show, which, by the way, I like Pat and Ty, and I think those guys are really good at what they do. And Ty's a Packer fan, of course. So, you know, got to support my guy on that. But, you know, they have to create that. That's why it's so funny, I think, to me, that they're a part of ESPN, because they're part of the machine now. And they have been able to keep their distance a little bit and keep that edge, which I think is cool. But it fed into Aaron Rodgers, you know, presuppositions about the media and the way that he's treated it. And so he used it as a hobby horse to go on and, you know, say this and say that. And I think, frankly, to his detriment. Like, it has been so easy when he goes on to McAfee and says, you know, we want to keep the bullshit out of, you know, all that stuff that's not about winning. Let's keep it out of the locker room. And then he goes to Egypt instead of going to mandatory minicamp. And it's just sort of like, okay, Aaron, like, if you hadn't been on the show, it would have been easier to just say, well, he had this thing and whatever, but he didn't. So now you can bring back this thing he said. So sometimes it's sort of like he's his own worst enemy with some of this stuff, because now he's so vocal. It's like, Aaron, this is why in 2014 you didn't say anything.
Yeah.
So,
and it's kind of interesting to watch him react to what he's been doing too, like to be the quiet guy, which I think most people want to go through, but you see that like later on in their career. Like, I used to talk and now I'm done. And now it's the opposite. Maybe he'll go back and not talk so much. I wanted to ask something more about NFL overall. And it's been interesting to watch, you know, gambling's been around a long time, and not just in all of sports, but hardcore in the NFL. But now we're talking about people involved in the game that are getting in trouble for gambling on sports. So what's it been like introducing gambling or betting or all of this into your coverage, but then to take it to the next step and say X, Y, and Z is going to get in trouble because he plays for the team, or he's a part of the team, or she's a part of the team? What's that been like?
I will tell you, I have had no issue morally with any of it. And part of that is because I see a very bright line between having a sponsor, you know, FanDuel is a sponsor on the Locked On Podcast Network. And fans enjoy the Packers over under is 9.5 wins. And I think they're going to go over. I'm not going to do a whole segment on it, but I will just casually mention, this, or I'll say, you know, last year I kept saying 32. I think Jordan Love's passing total was like 3,250. I'm like, if he plays 17 games, he is going to sleepwalk to 3,200 yards. Like, that's crazy. And by the way, I made money on that.
Right.
And so I get to say to fans, I put my money where my mouth is. I don't just say a thing to say it. I say a thing because I believe it. And so in some ways, gambling has given me license to
That's
prove it. I have receipts of myself, right? I get to say, I'm not just out here spouting takes. I believe these things. The penalty part, again, I see a very bright line, because what they're doing, what they're getting in trouble for mostly, is gambling on games where you're a part of the process. You're a part of the action. The integrity of the game is at stake. Like Calvin Ridley betting on Falcons games while he's a member of the Atlanta Falcons is absurd. Like, that is a sanctity of the game level infraction. You just can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
And like, just because I can do it doesn't mean he can do it. It's the same way I can trade stocks, but someone who works at Pfizer and knows about a new drug coming can't trade on that information. It's the same basic premise. And so I don't have any problem drawing those distinctions. Now, I think it gets muddy, like the Lions players who were suspended for gambling at the facility. I think that gets a little weird. Like, they were gambling on college football games. They just happened to be at the facility.
Right.
And it, like, if you're the Jets and the Giants, there's a sports book at the stadium. So it's sort of like, that's where you get a little bit like, okay, really, they can't gamble on college football on something totally legal because they're at the facility. That seems silly to me.
Yeah.
But that's the rule.
Yeah.
And so if that's the rule, and you have to follow the rule. This has been a rule from time immemorial. Before gambling was even legal, there were these things on, like, you can't bet on the game, or it's going to be more, you will get a bigger penalty than just, oh, you gambled. That's not the issue. The issue is the sanctity of the game. And I understand the NFL saying we cannot be made to be seen, because we saw this in the NBA. Someone betting on himself to make money, taking himself out of games. Oh, I'm sick, so he can hit the under on his rebounds. Like that is absolutely, obviously wrong. And so I can't do that, right? You can't do that. If you bet on an NBA game, you cannot affect the outcome. But a player betting on a game that he's playing in, or even that he's not playing in, which was true for Ridley, who was hurt, that, like, you just can't do that. And that distinction to me is not hard to draw.
I agree. And that's interesting about, like, being at the facility when it's just like, you could get there before your shift or get there before you're supposed to be doing anything. You just happen to be there. Last one before I let you go.
Brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. No, just kidding.
Yeah, exactly. Last one before I let you go. This Brandon Aiyuk saga has been very interesting to me, because he's a 775.
Is it over yet? Can we be done?
Tell me more.
I need this to be over. We have spent more time talking about Brandon Aiyuk, who, while I think is a very, very, very good football player, he's not going to, if he goes to Pittsburgh, he's not going to change the Steelers' life. Like, I don't think it changes anything at all about how I view the Pittsburgh Steelers in the AFC playoffs. And I asked this question on Twitter, and I think it's right.
Does it change your view on Aiyuk at all?
No, because he deserves, like, they have made it clear, the 49ers, that they lowballed him. I mean, obvious. 26 million.
Then tell me more about that. If that's the case,
so this is
concentrating on that more.
This is the ultimate F around and find out if you're the San Francisco 49ers.
Okay.
Because think back a couple years ago, Deebo Samuel, they jerked him around. He asked for a trade, and they finally paid him. A year ago, Nick Bosa, he said in this training camp, he thought he was going to get traded last year amid contract negotiations, because that's how contentious they got. And now you have a player who you lowballed again. Clearly, this is part of their MO, that they lowballed him. He went out and found teams and said, they're going to pay me $30 million. Why won't you?
Yeah.
And he had to say, then trade me. And guess what? He didn't really want to get traded. Like, that's obvious. If he really wanted to be traded, he'd be gone. The Patriots said, we'll pay the 49ers asking price, and we'll pay you all the money. And he said, I'm good. And you can say, well, he didn't want to go to Boston. A young black athlete doesn't want to go to Boston if they can avoid it. And by the way, in the NBA, we've seen that actually people have said that on the record about that. But it's still, it's still $30+ million, and you get out of a situation you seem to not want to be in, but that's not really the case. What he wants is for the 49ers to value him. This is the old Jess. This is the old, I don't want to take out the trash, or I want you to want to take out the trash. Like it's not that I want you to take out the garbage. I want you to want to take out the garbage. And I think that's what this is from Brandon Aiyuk. It's not that I want to go. I want you to value me enough for I want to stay, because I do want to stay, but I want to feel like you want me to stay. And the money is just the way that you show that valuing. So saying 26 million when someone's obviously going to pay me 30 million a year, which by the way, over a 4-year deal, we're talking about $16 million. That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
Understanding, look, if you're getting 4 years, 28 versus 4 years, 30 annually, either way, you're generationally wealthy, but that's not the point, because then you should take 40, right? Or you should take 20. Like once you dig into it that granularly, it kind of all falls apart, honestly, but you want to be valued at your value. But at the same time, I don't think Brandon Aiyuk changes the destiny of the 49ers all that much. Like I think they're the favorites without him, and I think they're the favorites with him. This isn't quite Russell Westbrook with the Lakers when we're talking constantly about it.
I think that's what makes it more intriguing, though. Yeah, it's because he's not like this generational.
Like if this was Justin Jefferson, I understand why we're spending so much time talking about this.
Yeah.
But I think, frankly, maybe it's because there's nothing else to talk about.
Yeah,
and I really think like, this is the most boring training camp we've been through in a while. Like last year, we had Aaron Rodgers. We could talk about Aaron Rodgers in New York every single day. What's the drama this year? Russell Wilson or Justin Fields? Who cares?
Yeah.
So let's talk about Brandon Aiyuk, because that's the intrigue. This is the other thing, and you know this on the baseball side, because this has been true in baseball for a long time. The most interesting part of baseball, there's two parts. It's the playoffs and it's the hot stove.
Mm-hmm.
Like from May till September, it's not that interesting in terms of the big storylines, right? Teams love their fans love their teams. They're going to be in, all those games, but the storylines usually not that interesting unless Aaron Judge is trying to hit 60 home runs.
Yeah.
The fun is in the offseason, or the fun in the postseason. And I think that's part of this too. We have to have some drama to talk about, and there just isn't that much drama to talk about other than Brandon Aiyuk. So we've blown this up like this is, a foundational move in the NFL, and it's just frankly not. But that's okay. Yeah. Like I just need it to be over, because it's just I'm sick of it. I'm over it.
You heard it. Peter wants it over. So
not the interview, just the Brandon Aiyuk stuff.
Well, actually, that's the perfect segue, because we're ending it now.
Okay.
So, yeah, but it's just because you did great. You did amazing, sweetie.
I appreciate it.
Thanks for stopping by. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Jess.
That was Peter Bukowski of Locked On Packers and The Leap, one of my favorite people in the world, because not only does he not hold back, but it's fun to see how far him and I have come. We started this small little podcast maybe a decade ago, on YouTube. I think it's got like 14 views each episode. I recently deleted it because I was scared that I said something stupid, and not like anything that's controversial, but I just say weird things, and I've grown up a little bit, not physically, but emotionally. Always good to hear from Bukowski. He's got the ins and outs of the Packers and everything else. Really interesting to see how gambling coverage has not only been introduced into content and all the other media's coverage, but the fact that we're talking about some of these people being suspended and dealing with these penalties after being, dealing with gambling. It's super interesting. So thanks to him for stopping by, and thanks to all of you for listening, and happy NFL season. We have more football stuff heading into the next few weeks, and then some. Excited to see that. And let's hoping some of these storylines heat up, and it's not just Aaron Rodgers conspiracy theories and Taylor Swift. Actually, we can keep the Taylor Swift stuff going. Your girl loves that. Thanks for tuning in to Short and to the Point here on Awful Announcing and The Comeback, and we'll see you next time.
Want even more short and to the point? Follow Jessica at Kleinschmidt JD and head over to thecomeback.com and awfulannouncing.com.